I have been with my partner for 7 years. We initially met online, and after meeting in person a few times and realizing our affection for one another, we found it promising to move in together. I moved from California to Pennsylvania to be with him throughout graduate school. All was seemingly well during this time. I have never really had any reason to not trust him. I encouraged him to very much so, to try his best to make friends, or to explore hobbies on his own outside of the various ones we share, because I have my own passions. And I found we connected most when we met in the middle through conversations about these passions, through the act of explaining or showcasing what we've taken in or learned. Throughout these 7 years, he has struggled with very low self-esteem. And though I don't necessarily think of myself as the pillar of self-love, the depth of mine doesn't reach the low perception of his self-value. Because of this, he has seen and stopped seeing both a counselor and a therapist, and has been on medication to help for the last 6 months. Things were seemingly well between us, and continued to be pretty fluid. We continued to share things, and take long walks, and were pretty open-ended about where we stood in the relationship. If one was feeling a bit of an ebb, the other would pick up more of a share, and vice versa. However, things took a bit of a dip about 2 days ago when I felt the ebb and asked him about it. Initially, he said there was really nothing wrong. And perhaps I was just feeling this way because with our schedules we haven't been able to see one another for long periods of time like we are used to, which is true. But the feeling continued to irk me, and when I asked about it a second time, he confessed to me. He had begun talking to another girl from another country via Instagram direct messages. And though things between she and him never crossed the boundaries of platonic friendship, he really loved the initial rush of someone asking him questions about his favorite movie, his favorite album, his favorite book. All things he and I already know very well about one another. I asked if he'd sent any selfies, or anything risque, and he said no, though I can't confirm, because he deleted the messages. A good deal of me believes him, because of how open he was about the initial conversations to begin with. We slept apart, and I just felt really confused the entire night, because I couldn't really resonate with wanting that sort of attention from someone else. If anything, his yearning for that type of attention sort of hurt. It felt like I wasn't doing enough, or giving enough. The next morning, though I don't have an Instagram, and am not on the app, I went to check his using the desktop version, and found that posts where he once called me the love of his life, or a specific post with a gift I gave him that once said, "Greatest gift from the greatest girl," were still on his profile, but the words, girlfriend, or love of my life, were completed erased. With this realization, my confusion and hurt turned to very real heartache. I called him and asked if he had deleted these words from the specific posts, and with shame, he said yes, he did. When I asked why, he said it was because he just didn't want the attention from the girl asking him about himself to be disrupted if she found out he was in a long-term relationship. I guess this is where I asked the obvious and questioned why someone who is just asking about your favorite books, movies, etc., would be driven away by the fact that you have a girlfriend. And he said he didn't know why he did it, and that it was a massive mistake. At the risk of seeming toxic, and I will take full accountability for seeming so or being so, I asked him to please deactivate his Instagram for the time being while we sort through this, his Twitter as well. He did, and though I was feeling a bit of relief about that, I couldn't help but feel a bit saddened that he didn't choose to do that on his own for the benefit of our relationship. He had to wait for me to ask. Which again, just made me feel like such a toxic and controlling partner. 2 things I always strive to be so far from. When he got home from work, we discussed everything at massive length, and he continued to swear up and down that these conversations pertained strictly to music, movies, and books, and he didn't have interest in her. Just interest in the initial rush of the attention he was receiving. We read a few articles, and he broke things down to me as his self-esteem has never been lower. Despite his career as a doctor being at a high, and his finances in order, he felt things with his music weren't taking off. And with that came a feeling that he wasn't special, and it was nice for someone to make him feel that way. I felt shame and asked him if I wasn't doing enough or giving enough to him to make him feel that way. He said, I defiantly was. But my love, and attention and affection, became a pillar he could rely on, and got used to, so with new attention came a rush. And he liked that. I asked him if he wanted to be single and find that rush in dating new people. And he kept insisting that that's so far from what he wants. He wants to remain a couple and do all he can to work on these things together. Though I can't help but correlate that feeling he enjoys with the feeling of a first date. Which hurts, of course. I told him I didn't really see how we could move past this because there was nothing much for me to make an attempt to work on moving forward. This seems to be a self-stemming problem that I emphasize with, but just don't want to be on the receiving end of the counter effects. So though it is incredibly uneasy to begin to think of how difficult it'll be to begin again, it is just as difficult to think about how difficult it would be to stay and try to rebuild back up an issue that I feel like just a bystander. When it comes to, this has all been very painful, and if this comes to an end, I just want it to be as civil and as possible. He deserves to love himself, but not at the expense of the love we have between us. I deserve love that is stable and comforting, and not laced with newfound paranoia. Despite this all, my heart is still very much in this, of course, and he has been very vocal about how it was just one mistake. Nothing happened, we can work through this, etc. And I secretly keep hoping he will make a step, any step really, to showcase these words and implement action, seek a new therapist. Find the two of us a relationship counselor, buy a book on self-help or on how couple conquer affairs, anything at all. Without me having to be the one to ask him. I just want him to have that yearning that he continues to say he has, but instead of saying it, I was him to show me. That makes me irrational or just plain dumb. I believe to be in a state where I can handle either answer. Or something completely different just the same. Do all think I'm blowing something completely out of proportion? Given how this was an exchange of conversation between him and another girl for just a few days. And his erasure of me on his profile was only for about 2 days? This has been a first in this relationship, this has been a first in my life, truthfully. I just felt completely vulnerable and isolated. Almost all the marriages in my family have been arranged marriages. My mom's marriage to my bio dad was an arranged marriage, but it ended up in a messy divorce and him completely abandoning us, before I was even born. My mom had a love marriage the second time, despite the disapproval of her family, and has been much happier with my stepdad than she probably would have ever been with my bio dad. Because of this, my mom has always been very adamant that she would not try to force us, my siblings and I, into arranged marriages despite what the rest of our family thought. I've been with my fiancé for 3 years now, we got engaged 2 months ago. He's met my parents and siblings, but as far as the majority of my extended family were concerned, I was single until 2 months ago. Early last year, my fiancé dropped me off home after work one day and my uncle was there. My uncle is the oldest sibling my mom has, so he's seen as the head of the family. He thinks he has a say in what the rest of us do. It was obvious my uncle was pissed, and he ended up grilling my fiancé, and I assume he met his standards. A lot of arranged marriages are about what both families can gain from one another, so he told my mom to get us married quickly. He wanted to make it look like we had an arranged marriage before the rest of our family found out. My mom ignored him and told us to keep dating if it's what we wanted. Over the past year, he's mentioned me getting married to my mom every single time he's spoken to her. Apparently, my uncle assumed just because he'd given the order that we were going to get married soon. He told my cousin, his daughter, that I had agreed to an arranged marriage, and because I had and she was older, she should agree to the match he'd found her. My cousin never mentioned this to me, but she did agree to marry the man my uncle found for her. They got married late last year. They haven't had a good marriage and my cousin is very unhappy. Her husband is incredibly controlling and hardly ever lets her go anywhere without him or a member of his family. Last week, she was over at my house when my fiancé came over to drop some of the clothes I'd left at his place over. When I told my family about my engagement, they all assumed it was an arranged marriage and I didn't bother clarifying because it really isn't anyone's business. You don't tend to do sleepovers if you're having an arranged marriage, so my cousin knew immediately it wasn't what she assumed. She started asking me questions about my relationship and I answered honestly. She got really angry at me and kept demanding to know why I didn't tell her about him. The thing is, I'm very close to this cousin, but I also know how our family is about dating and I didn't want my male cousins trying to strong-arm my fiancé. They've jokingly threatened this before. She pretty much blamed me for her arranged marriage and said she only agreed because she thought I was going to have one too, and if I had told her I had a boyfriend, she would have had the courage to stand up to her family. She hasn't spoken to me since. I do feel bad for her. I know how unhappy she is, but if she had mentioned what my uncle told her earlier, I would have clarified. I don't want this to be the end of our relationship, but I don't know what I can do to fix this. I have this vegan coworker, we'll call her Vegan, who is very active on FB and in the office about being vegan and how cruel farming is and everything. Each to their own. I don't necessarily disagree with her views on animal cruelty, but here's the thing, I'm a hunter. Not a trophy hunter, but I do shoot feral pigs, rabbits, ducks, introduced, classified game ducks, and foxes, and I fish too. All except for the fish are classified as pests. Foxes especially kill native wildlife and farm animals, and farmers will often put you up on their property for free to hunt them. I have passed tests here, especially for identification of game ducks versus protected species, and practice ethical hunting. I.e. allow the animal to have a fair chase, no dogs or tracking devices. Practicing marksmanship and dispatching prey swiftly and humanely and not wasting the meat. None of that is obviously good enough for Vegan. When she first came onto the team and told everyone she was vegan, I kept my mouth shut about my hunting. I also think she's really intolerant because she preaches to people about how going vegan will help with their various ailments, and always turns up her nose at people heating up meat in microwave. As a result, we've kind of consciously started excluding her when we get up for lunch. However, last year I started going hunting more regularly with a work friend from another department, whose uncle owns a farm where feral pigs and like are an issue, and he often swings by to have a chat about guns and bows and our next trip, and she found out I was a hunter. This isn't even at our desks, it's in the kitchen area that has tables and stuff, and we sometimes eat our lunches together. Ever since then, every conversation I've had with her, she's referred to hunting and how cruel it is. One time, I wore a leather pencil skirt to work and she had a go at me for wearing animal products. She seems to have singled me because of the fact that I go hunting. My boss has no spine, I've tried talking to him about this. But she just intimidates him and makes it seem like she's been persecuted, and he's backed down from that. She even tried to get a vegan shelf in the fridge and tried to rope in some Hindu vegetarian guys to do that, but they pointed out that they use milk and cheese and honey in their cooking. They also think she's nuts. It's gotten to the point where we go out for drinks on a Friday night at 5 and we never ask her. I don't organize these things, a coworker does, but my boss told me, when I brought it up in one-on-one meeting, that she feels really left out and she seems to think it's my fault because I've been here for longer and I'm somehow poisoning them against her, or something. I have since been conscious of this. If anyone starts conversation about vegan, I just say I don't talk to her unless it's work-related and she's more than adequate at her job. It's actually become something of a joke or catchphrase. I told my boss I don't organize anything except official events, and she's always been invited. If she's not invited to informal stuff, that's not even organized by me, then that's not my problem. The coworker that doesn't invite her, she managed to piss him off because he's eaten guinea pig, he's from Peru. And she asked him if he'd eaten any of his other pets. For the record, he never ate a guinea pig that was a pet. It's something they eat in Peru. Whenever she brings up hunting or anything, I just point blank ask her there was anything work-related that she wanted to talk about, and if there wasn't, I would start talking to someone else or just walk off. I have asked her multiple times to keep conversations work-related. I never start a conversation with her at all. Most of the time, she pounces when I'm in the kitchen making tea, getting water, or just stretching my legs. One time last week, a group of us were talking and she got up to join the discussion. A horrible silence fell over the group to the point where I just excused myself and went to my desk, and so did a few others. It all came to a head in our team meeting today when our boss, usually at the ends, asks if there's any positive news or celebrations outside of work people want to share, like engagements, marathons, charity appeals, etc., and Vegan sarcastically asked me how many lives I'd taken last weekend. I got annoyed and said her constant badgering me about my hobbies and choice to eat meat was discriminatory and bothersome, and that unless it was work-related, she was not to engage me in conversation otherwise, and told our scribe to put that in the meeting minutes. She seemed a bit shocked by that, and my boss looked uncomfortable but said fair enough. I thought that was the end of that, but the right before our boss went to close the meeting, 2 other coworkers also put their hands up and asked Vegan to only engage them in work-related discussions, and that they were also uncomfortable being given non-medical health advice pertaining to their choice to consume meat and their diets. Again, boss looked uncomfortable but asked Vegan to respect their wishes and closed the meeting. Vegan didn't look anyone in the eye after that but headed straight to the bathroom. My boss was trying to get one of the co-workers to see if she was okay. And I think one of them eventually checked up on her, but she was in a cubicle and asked to be left alone. She eventually came out and asked my boss to leave early, which she did. I feel awful now. She embarrassed me in front of my team with the lives taken comment, so I pushed back, but I am caught between not wanting her to miserable and not wanting anything to do with her at all. A few of my co-workers and I ended up in a proactive conference call after this with HR, who basically said that always been subjected to unwanted advice and jabs about eating meat was not okay. But some mediation was in order to cut the tension in the workplace. The HR rep then called my boss, who explained what happened in the team meeting and complaints that we'd made one-on-one etc., but then he went into a meeting room and didn't hear the rest of discussion. I don't know what to do, assuming she comes into work tomorrow, or if I should even talk to her at all. My daughter is 16 years old and in high school. I noticed recently that she's been behaving in a bad manner, constantly commenting on other people's looks, belongings, calling them stuff that isn't cool, and just being insensitive. It's like she lost a filter or something, because usually she's polite, but my wife suspected that our daughter's sudden misbehavior occurred after she started hanging out with new girls from the school. Basically the mean type, and have picked on their behavior. I've sat with my daughter and had many discussions about how her behavior has been negatively affecting everyone around her. Our housemaid is the person most affected here, and my daughter has chosen her to be her target for hair, clothes, etiquette, criticism. She has complained about our daughter calling her offensive names like filthy and gross for cleaning certain areas in our house. I took a stand and explicitly told my daughter I'd punish her if she ever said stuff like that to our housemaid again. Last week my daughter had a party to go to. Earlier that day she called our housemaid filthy, so I grounded her by not letting her go to the party. She threw a fit and called our housemaid a liar, saying she never called her that. That was the end of it. Days later my daughter came to me saying she couldn't find her iPhone after looking everywhere. She asked me to call her number and I did. My wife and I were stunned to discover that the iPhone was ringing inside our housemaid's bag. I had a confrontation with her immediately, and she denied and cried, saying she never touched the phone nor had any idea how it got there. I noticed my daughter calling her thief repeatedly, so I told her to stop and go to her room. I checked the indoor camera before continuing the argument and saw my daughter place her iPhone inside our housemaid's bag. I was livid. I apologized to the housemaid and gave her the rest of the day off. I then showed the video to my daughter and she was absolutely speechless. I said what she did was immoral and straight up offensive to tamper with that poor woman's livelihood over a petty party she couldn't go to. I told her she was grounded and will have to spend the night in the backyard. She is a germaphobe. But she cried, begging me to not make her sleep with the dirt, insects, and hot temp. I refused to discuss it or I'd make it 2 nights. My wife said I should go easy on her, but I said calling people filthy and accusing them of stealing wasn't okay. In fact, it was the absolute worst. I then went through with my punishment. The reason I chose this punishment was because of the fact that my daughter says she is a germaphobe and used this as excuse to insult others' hygiene and appearance. Our backyard has dirt and bugs in it, and this kind of things get her uncomfortable, but other than that the backyard is 100% safe.